Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting up to speed on some of the really compelling ideas and figures making waves today. And today, we're diving into something quite specific, a really powerful tribute written about Charlie Kirk following his recent passing. It's sparked a lot of conversation. We're looking at a perspective that's, well, it's unique, definitely fervent, and it makes some pretty striking claims. Just to give you a taste, let me share 3 surprising things highlighted in this tribute right from the get-go. First, did you know the author points out Kirk never held what he calls worldly titles or degrees, yet he was admired for this, quote, unwavering courage to speak the truth. Seen as someone who really shaped a whole generation. That's quite a claim for someone without those formal credentials. Yeah, it is. Okay, second point, also fascinating. Kirk was Protestant. But the author notes that in defending things like natural law, marriage, the sanctity of life, Kirk apparently often sounded more Catholic than many of our bishops and cardinals today.
That's a really striking comparison, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Especially given the theological background. It tells you a lot about the author's perspective.
It really does. And maybe the most dramatic claim. The author doesn't just see Kirk's death as a tragedy. He actually frames it as a, quote, calculated act by the woke world aimed at silencing conservatism.
Wow.
But, and here's the twist, the author believes this will totally backfire. He thinks it'll ignite a fire, strengthen the cause, basically turn Kirk into a martyr. It's a very defiant stance.
A very strong interpretation of events. Yeah.
Exactly. So what's the point for you listening? Well, we're going to unpack this specific, very passionate view on Charlie Kirk. We'll explore the insights from this tribute, helping you understand the intense admiration and the pretty profound implications the author draws from it all.
And I think this deep dive really offers a shortcut to understanding that intensity, how loss can be reframed, almost weaponized, into fuel for a movement. It shows how deeply followers can connect with their leaders' perceived struggles.
Absolutely. And just a note, if you want the full context, all the details behind this tribute we're discussing, you can find it at www.epistles.online. Okay, so let's get into the heart of it. The author starts by focusing on what he calls Kirk's voice of courage and conviction. He immediately highlights Kirk's unwavering courage to speak the truth. And he sets this up as a direct contrast to a world he describes as filled with political correctness, liberal illusions, and poisonous ideologies.
Right. And what's significant there is how the courage is defined. It's not just like being generally outspoken. It's framed as a very deliberate stand against those specific forces the author sees as negative. Kirk is positioned as this staunch defender of life, family, and God's order in society.
So it's courage with a very specific target.
Exactly. It creates this narrative of clear ideological battle lines. And, that kind of narrative can be really effective in mobilizing people, in portraying a leader as uncompromising, even if others find him controversial. It helps explain why this author found him so compelling.
And the source mentions specific instances where Kirk's voice supposedly made a big difference, like his willingness to speak out where, as the author puts it, many clergy refused to speak.
Which implies there was this vacuum, right? A space others were hesitant to fill, and Kirk stepped into it.
Yeah, reinforcing that idea of him being this necessary, bold voice for certain values.
And, if you think about it in today's world, there's just so much noise, right? Information overload. So a voice that's really clear, really unapologetic, even if it ruffles feathers, it can cut through all that for a lot of people.
That makes sense, like a signal in the static.
Precisely. For people looking for conviction, maybe feeling a bit lost in the chaos, someone like Kirk could offer that strong focal point. Direct answers, no ambiguity.
Okay, so beyond just the courage of his voice, the author gets really specific about the principles Kirk championed. He paints this picture of Kirk emphasizing the traditional family, saying Kirk reminded young people family is the bedrock of civilization, and stressing that fathers must lead, mothers must nurture, and crucially, that children must be formed in truth and discipline. Very foundational stuff.
And connecting that to the bigger picture the author is painting, these aren't just presented as, Kirk's personal takes. They're explicitly framed by the author as defending what he interprets as natural law, and what he describes as a patriarchal society, which he calls a God-designed natural order.
Right.
And he sets this up directly against what he labels feminist madness and gender ideology.
So it clearly defines what Kirk stood for, but also what he stood against, at least in this author's view.
Exactly. It lays out the ideological battlefield.
Yeah.
And the appeal there often seems to be towards a sense of maybe timeless order versus what's seen as modern confusion or chaos.
And the tribute also mentions other things the author calls lunacies that Kirk apparently addressed. Things like abortion, what the author calls the confusion of gender ideology, and the assault on borders that weakens nations.
Right.
The author also notes Kirk was skeptical about traditional college routes, urging practical contributions instead of, getting useless degrees and debt.
Yeah, and that point about tradition, about the wisdom our ancestors knew well, it kind of begs the question, doesn't it? How does that resonate today? For this author, it's clearly presented as returning to fundamental truths, not just like being cynical.
And the college thing.
Well, that taps into some very real contemporary anxieties, I think. Concerns about student debt, the value of higher ed versus practical skills. You hear echoes of that across the board, really.
So it's presented as both timeless wisdom and relevant critique.
In this author's view, yes, a callback to principles, but also addressing current worries.
Okay, this passionate defense then leads into something quite personal in the tribute. The author expresses this really deep connection with Kirk. He actually says, "I cannot help but see something of my own struggle in him." And he highlights this shared trait, calling them both ordinary men in the eyes of the world who believe that, quote, "truth does not require credentials to shine. What it requires is courage."
And that's such a key moment in the piece, isn't it? Because that shared struggle, that personal kinship, it does more than just make it relatable. It kind of universalizes Kirk's mission for anyone who identifies with that worldview.
Turns it into a collective thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It emphasizes that for this author, Kirk wasn't just some distant public figure. He was a brother in arms, a reflection of his own fight. And their shared goal, it's framed very broadly, defending the family, defending the church, defending civilization itself from what he calls the avalanche of lies pushed by the so-called progressives.
Wow. So it's not just admiration, it's like a shared identity.
A deep alignment of purpose. Yeah.
And presumably that strengthens the whole argument for people reading it who feel the same way. It suggests Kirk's fight continues through them.
Absolutely. That sense of we're in this together, facing common enemies, perceived or real. That's incredibly powerful for keeping a movement going. Identifying so personally with Kirk reinforces the idea that his struggle is their struggle now. It's like passing the torch.
Which brings us then to the most dramatic claims, the ones about Kirk's death and the forces the author believes are involved. So how does this all land for his followers? The author doesn't mince words. He claims the woke world does not fight fairly, says it uses intimidation, censorship, and even violence.
Strong accusations.
Very. And he directly links Kirk's deaths to this, stating flatly, they think eliminating leaders will end the movement, but history proves the opposite. Martyrs only strengthen the cause.
Now, looking at this just from a narrative standpoint, without weighing in on the claims themselves, it raises fascinating questions about how groups process loss, how they build stories of resilience. The author clearly believes that by, quote, silencing Charlie Kirk, these forces haven't won. Instead, they've ignited a fire that will spread wider and burn brighter.
He explicitly calls him a martyr.
Yes, a martyr who is guaranteed the fight will go on, inspiring, quote, young bloods to rise up. It's turning tragedy into a rallying cry, drawing on that historical power of martyrdom to galvanize people.
And the author makes it very clear who he thinks should be inspired. He says Kirk's life should be an inspiration for every Christian who still believes in the traditional family, in faith in God, and in the dignity of work and responsibility.
Yeah, a very direct call to a specific group. And that framing, the idea that someone has fallen for the cause, but the cause rises because of it, that's incredibly mobilizing. It reasserts the values, strengthens the group identity, and basically says the leader's influence isn't just continuing, it's amplified by their death.
It ensures the fight continues through others, as you said.
Precisely. It can be incredibly effective in solidifying commitment.
Okay, so let's just briefly recap what we've seen in this particular tribute. It paints Charlie Kirk as this courageous voice, impactful despite lacking formal credentials, as a staunch defender of very specific ideas about family, society, and faith. And maybe most significantly, frames his death not as an end, but as the spark for an even stronger fight, positioning him as a martyr.
Which leads to a really provocative thought, I think. Considering the sheer intensity of conviction in this tribute, what does it actually mean for a movement when a key figure is seen this way? Not just as a leader, but as a martyr whose death is believed to strengthen the cause, not weaken it. How might that narrative, so personal, so ideologically charged, shape how people engage with those principles going forward? What does it tell us about belief facing opposition?
That is a really fascinating question to chew on. It definitely highlights how powerful conviction and narratives like martyrdom can be in, shaping movements and public discourse. And that brings us towards the end of this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us as we explored this really powerful, very heartfelt tribute to Charlie Kirk. And just a reminder, the author behind this piece we've been discussing is the creator of www.epistles.online.
Right, and Epistles positions itself as a resource for Catholics who are looking for what the author describes as a balanced perspective. He argues it's neither modernist, which often means adapting to secular ideas, nor ultra-traditionalist, which can sometimes mean resisting church reforms. The site aims to directly confront what the author sees as challenges to the Catholic faith. He's openly fighting things like clericalism, that's like an overemphasis on clergy power, plus liberalism and modernism within the church. Forces he believes are driving a crisis of faith.
So if that perspective interests you, check it out. And we warmly invite you, our listeners, to support his apostolate however you feel you can. Whether that's through prayers, sharing his posts online, or subscribing, it all helps keep the mission active and, importantly, freely available. We look forward to our next deep dive with you.